what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This podcast is sponsored by Jackson Creative, a custom communication agency located in downtown Hickory, specializing in online content creation. To learn more, visit thejacksoncreative.com. Jackson Creative, we tell your story.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forecast. We are your connection to the who's who in the game of golf. We hope to make you laugh, learn, and win, and grow your golf IQ. I'm your host, Allen Burton, Director of Instruction for the Allen Burton Golf Academy at Lake Hickory Country Club in Hickory, North Carolina. I'd like to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can find us on themesh.tv and all your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. Be sure to check out all the other shows on themesh.tv. We're produced right here in Western North Carolina, and on today's episode, I'm very blessed. I've got a very talented instructor all the way from Long Beach, California, Mr. Dana Dahlquist. Dana, I want to thank you for taking time out. I know you're a busy instructor and you got a very heavy lesson load out there, and thanks for taking time and sharing a little time with us and talking golf, man.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun. Given the circumstances, I don't know if I'm necessarily that busy, but I'm trying to make myself busy. That's for certain.
Yeah. So I guess, now, are you quarantined there at the house with your family, and that's the situation? You're not teaching every day on the range?
Yeah, we can't in California. We can't necessarily go outside. So most of the instruction is trying to use and utilize technology like FaceTime and video lessons and things of that nature. Right.
That's very similar to what's going on here. Actually, we have the golf course that I teach at is open, but there's a lot of restrictions on how golfers have to coordinate their play, and the game's changing a lot for those that are still playing and getting the opportunity to play. I'm teaching very little inside, and like you, trying to adapt to this new situation for the moment, at least, and seeing what technologies we can take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Before this situation, were you doing much of the online instruction, having people send you videos and dealing with it through FaceTime and apps and things like that? Or are you?
Yeah. So prior to all this going on, it's kind of an interesting thing because, I'm on the road a little bit and, basically doing, a PGA Tour schedule, LPGA Tour schedule, and a little bit of teaching at home. So one of the interesting things it's kind of a new phenomenon, to be fair, is that when we are traveling, you now have ability to do lessons essentially online. So you're a little bit handicapped based off the Wi-Fi connection that you have. But I think, now that I'm in my house and I have a good connection and, now it's pretty streamlined. But there's a little thing here and there that pops up that doesn't necessarily work as well as I'd like. But I was pretty savvy with, the online stuff prior to this all taking place. But, to be fair, I think we're going to learn a lot from this. And, I think it's good, not only for the student, but for the teacher to kind of take stock where they're at and give an opportunity to learn. So that's kind of the benefit of the situation we're in. We got to have an optimistic mindset. I think that's important. So
I agree 100%. Yeah. I think we're all going to force ourselves to grow in ways we've never thought were necessary as teachers and communicators.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're on the range and it's very easy to just put your hands on your client and move them around and get them to feel what you want them to do. And sometimes now with that communication tool taken away from us, we're going to have to resort to some better language and some better education of our language.
Correct. 100%.
It's a big deal. And I think you being the instructor that you are, you brought a lot of information to me. I know we've never personally met, but I follow your stuff like everybody. Follow what's going on through social media to try and stay abreast of what the great instructors are doing and helping their players. I don't work with tour players per se. I have a couple of young kids that are trying to make their way to that stage. I've coached them since they were kids, 6, 7, 8 years old. So it's fun to watch, and it's been very helpful for me, to see what it's going to take for these kids to make it to that next level, watching what you're doing with players. And you teach primarily when you teach an individual in person and you're not out on tour with a client, you're on a driving range. Is that correct in Long Beach there?
Yeah, I'm at the, we jokingly call it the Royal and Ancient El Dorado Park golf course in Long Beach. And, I teach at a municipal facility.
Uh-huh.
And we have, a pretty good history of kids coming out of the area that are, have made it on both tours. We have, Paul Goidos and Mallinger, Merrick, James O, and, Brianna Doe, and a lot of different players. I'm missing a few there. But I think one of the interesting things that, could be slightly overlooked is that we have a lot of golf courses in our area. So there's a lot of advantages to, kids getting out of school and being able to play pretty much year round. And the county of Los Angeles has been also really great with, creating avenues for them. So, and hopefully the parents feel like it's also a safe place for their kids to go and do something after school. And, they're not chased out of there. There's not too many rules that, there's not strict dress codes. You can still somewhat make golf cool. So we don't really have, if you came in an afternoon, 3:00 to my driving range, you're going to see 3 different high school teams, JV varsity kids practicing. So it's kind of a cool thing to watch.
Sure. Now, do you have a lot of public golf courses out there that are reasonably accessible to these kids, or is it a lot of private high-end facilities, or a little mixture?
Well, in Long Beach, we have a lot of public. So we have one high-end course, and we generally have the rest are all, recreation courses. So we have, El Dorado, where I'm at, Skylinks Recreation Park, Hartwell, where Tiger Woods learned to play golf, and a few other ones that are public, and they're pretty accessible. They're all within a mile or two of each other. But once you leave Long Beach and you go into LA, it becomes a little bit harder access. Yeah. And so you don't want to sit on a freeway trying to drive to a golf course, after school. So it is definitely an advantage.
Yeah, I've got a brother-in-law that lives up in Westlake Village, kind of on the northern end of Los Angeles there, and been there with them, visiting and playing golf in that area up there. So I kind of got a feel for the area a little bit. Been in your area a number of times, close over to Anaheim for trade shows years ago when I was in the music business. So I know the area pretty well. And with your background, tell me a little bit about, so our listeners can get a sense of, kind of where you came from. You were a competitive golfer, I understand, at one time, playing professionally. And that's kind of how you got into the teaching side of things, trying to learn more about your own swing. Is that how I understand it?
Yeah. So if we kind of go back to, we can go back to junior golf, high school. I was always kind of this, in the summertime at one of the golf courses, I assisted in the summer with the other kids, and because I was older, and that was kind of my first little instructional jaunt, and I didn't think any of it at the time, but as I kind of went into and I got older, I started getting more into the instruction side of things with trying to figure out golf swings, and I was always kind of enamored by the swing sequences that were in Golf Digest and Golf Magazine, and tried to emulate and do everything that I could. And then my competitive, I had a realization because of, I think, people I was growing up with. So the realization was that I didn't have the golf IQ that I should have. And looking back, it probably wasn't technical. Now, knowing there was some things that were technical that I wasn't doing, that was for certain. And there was some things that course management wise that I wasn't doing. And looking back, I probably could have tapped into more well-rounded coaching. I think that's important. And it's something that's interesting because, I have a lot of influence to a lot of young teachers growing up, and those that are getting into the business. And whether it's through the PGA program or through, they're playing and they want to get into coaching. And every one of those individuals brings stuff to the table, as did I at the time. I was more of a mechanical, I was originally like a macro grady guy. And so, but that doesn't necessarily make me a good teacher. The level of information doesn't make you a teacher. It's more of, the communication style, the understanding how to put the game together as a whole. And I think that's one of those things that we have to kind of be, even if you're a competitive player, doesn't necessarily mean that you can coach. And you hear that all the time too. So I think that's one of the interesting parts with this, is that there is a learning curve, as with anything. But I was definitely more book smart coming in to coaching. And over time I was able, and still learning, obviously, trying to become better on the other side of the spectrum. So hopefully that kind of paints the right picture. But I think because everybody you meet in this industry, whether it be a beginner or a competitive player, you're going to learn something along that way. And I think this has been one of the frustrations that a lot of young coaches or people getting into teaching have, is because if you're not standing on a driving range and you're not teaching people, beginners, everybody has this enamoration about teaching, a good player, and that's great. But, even the beginner, you learn a lot from. So yeah, it's an interesting road. Everybody has their own little story, but it's definitely been an interesting one.
Now, at what point did you decide that playing golf for a living was probably not the best idea? At what age did you kind of come to that realization and say, wow, this is really hard to compete against these guys, and maybe instructor or the way to go?
Yeah, really, really quickly, because I did at the time, my mindset wasn't correct. So it was kind of like, it was more like, I need to get my, let's say, just verbatim, my golf mechanics better. That was kind of where my mind was. And because I wasn't able to do things other people were doing to correlate a score. Now, some of that wasn't necessarily entirely true. Like looking back, this is kind of a hindsight thing. Everybody would have something slightly different, but putting together a score could have been just a little different daily routine. Spending more time maybe on a putting green, maybe more time on a golf course, working on hitting specific, spots on greens, things of that nature that I at the time would have taken for granted. And, I think another thing is also access. Like, I think during that time, I didn't have enough access. Whether it wasn't playing in enough tournaments. I think that's another one where you have to, at a young age, play in a lot more tournaments than you're maybe comfortable. And, that's another big thing. I think because we have kind of a very competitive Southern California group of players, we have the Golden State Tour and the Pepsi, and right now we have something called the Bow Tour that's been around for a few. You get pretty comfortable being in this bubble. And if anything possible, it would probably been a good idea if I, left for 6 months to a year and see what I could do. But, I think that also helps where I'm at now, because I'm able to kind of lead people in particular directions. So access was part of it too.
Absolutely. And I think we're all, as you mentioned, a product of our environment, and the direction we go sometimes is just what we know. If you were influenced by a coach as a young player, who would you say that biggest influence was that maybe sent you in that direction of becoming a mechanic?
Yeah, so I had particularly two at the time. So I had Mac O'Grady and Bobby Laskin were the two, and they were kind of joined at the hip at the time. And I think, with Bobby, there was a lot of good players around. So, Kevin Na and James O in particular, were students, and a couple other, Travis Johnson was younger, and Jin Park. And so there was a good group of kids. And I think it was, what's interesting is it became more of a, to me at the time, instead of more, I started elevating more into kind of more of a teaching mindset. during that whole time, if I look back, it wasn't really, what do I need to do just to hit the ball well, which would probably be a lot freer way of thinking. It turned into more of like, okay, well, how does this work?
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately and unfortunately, I think from the game aspect of things, I went away from that more towards the teaching end. So, blessing in disguise in many ways.
I use the analogy sometimes, I'm not a NASCAR fan, but it makes sense to me here in my region because there are a lot of NASCAR fans. When you say, to be a great coach or a great teacher, you might not be the best player. Conversely, that doesn't mean you can't be a great teacher and be a great player. It just the person who decides they're going to be a good coach has a number of rabbit holes they need to go down to make that transition to become that
Right.
great coach.
Right.
You can't practice every day for 8 hours a day and be a great coach. I mean, that's not your skill development, toward the goal. And so your player has to spend a lot of time hitting golf balls and playing golf and being on the golf course, and so people say, well, why didn't you try to play professionally? I said, well, I probably was not interested in being a professional golfer at the time, when I wanted to play. And I came into this industry in a very backwards direction at a very late time in my life. So my route wasn't typical of anybody currently teaching golf for a living. I can tell you that.
Right.
But we all get here how we get here. And now that we're here, the fascination to learn and to get better at what we do, I think keeps us all going from day to day to help our players, doesn't it?
Right. 100%. 100%.
And I think it's a neat thing. There is no, at least I've come to the understanding, there is no one absolute one way to do any of this. And when you get the player in front of you, you've got a lot of things to kind of figure out. And with you, you are working with tour players, you are working with better players, and they're coming to you with the game. They're coming to you with a swing. They're coming to you with their own understanding of what they do. And how many times are they willing to make major changes to see the results change?
That's always the question. So if so the regular golfer can make substantial movements and big changes. Is it sustainable? That's relative to their practice. So I have to somewhat paint that picture for them on what exactly that's going to look like, and then try to develop a daily routine for them, or a weekly routine, or a quarterly routine that will create that change for more of a long-term deal. Now, if they can do that, that's fantastic. I know that every coach kind of has their own preference of what they want to see in a golf swing, and that's fine. Like I used to be more critical of that earlier on, but now it doesn't necessarily matter as long as it's somewhat correct. Then fine. But I think what's interesting about average players relative to a touring professional is that you're really not necessarily changing a tour professional. What you're really doing is you're looking at it the same way as the regular amateur. So the regular amateur, has their comfort zone, their fear mechanisms that they may or may not have. And when you get a tour player in front of you, you have to look at that and go, okay, well, this guy every day is not practicing his putting enough, or he's not doing short game enough, or he's not playing in the off season enough. He's not, maybe not doing fitness enough. So you got to look at that before you really tackle maybe even a swing change. Because if the guy is not willing to hit balls just a little bit, it's hard to really do anything as far as it comes to, making a swing change. Now, on the flip side of that, you don't want them to become a guy just that is a range rat and hits balls. Mm-hmm. So there's a little trade-off, but it's still like we're all human beings. So we just have different skill sets. And I think that's something to kind of take note of. Then that's something that the average player can correlate to. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as far as what the player's doing, that's kind of always secondary.
Yeah. How many of the tour players that you work with are avid Trackman users on their own daily when you're not with them?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. weekly. I wouldn't say daily as much as weekly, and they all use it for different reasons. So some are looking at consistency of maybe ball speeds and ball data, and then some guys are more into getting into some averages of club data, just to maybe look at swing direction and make sure their angle of attack, launch and spin is right, stuff like that. And I think they don't make it anything more than that. I can kind of do that, but I won't necessarily explain that to the student because, they don't need to understand, their VSP and stuff like that.
Right.
But just some barometer of where they're at, I think is really, really important.
Sure. And you've seen that transition take place even at the PGA Tour level in the last 10 years, though, where guys weren't using anything and would almost, cross their fingers and go, I don't want that thing out here. And then all of a sudden everybody's buying them. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's funny because if we go back to 2009, 2010, we went out there with the orange box and put it behind a player. And, I had coaches come up and say, well, why are you doing this? And that makes it too complex and all this other stuff. If it's kind of interesting because now everybody uses it. And even some of the coaches that were kind of scared of it now use it because they just understand it. And it's a much easier tool to know that, okay, well, the reason why this ball's overdrawing is because this is happening. It's not necessarily a swing situation. It's now maybe a ball position change. It's a hit location on the face. It could be a lot of different things that can be quickly remedied. And it's a funny thing, I was talking with Patrick Reed's coach at Riviera last year, and they were talking about his irons, and he was hitting some irons that were, I don't know, some like hit location issues, so he wasn't seeing the ball fall to the left enough. Like he normally hit a certain shot pattern, and just 10 minutes on Trackman, he saw that and goes, okay, you're just going to switch this to this, and it went right back to normal. So there was no, it was kind of comforting, he said, in a way, for that to occur. So that's refreshing, because if we go back to 2010, people would be like, no, I don't really think so. It's just a little bit out of fear of not understanding.
Well, I can remember I worked at a place called Rock Barn Golf and Spa. They had a Champions Tour event there for about 11 years, and as a director of instruction there. And I first got Trackman. I was on the range during some warm-up days during the tournament, and just offered the players, hey, have you ever been on Trackman? Would you like to see some of your launch data? And I got emphatically, no, get out of here with that thing. We don't need that thing to play golf. For 2 or 3 years in a row. And then, my buddy Bobby Clampett was the first guy to really use the launch monitor out there, and proceeded to track me. It's like, why you spend so much money on that? I mean, you can get the data from something a whole lot less. And now I think Bobby owns 3 or 4 Trackmen, but Trackmans or Trackmen, I don't really know the plural. I couldn't afford but one, so
right.
Whether it's Trackmen or Trackmans, but anyway, it was funny. And the first guy I actually tried to get on Trackman just because I wanted to study what these guys were doing. I didn't really want to teach them anything. I just can I just put Trackman on you and kind of get some of your launch numbers? And it was Tommy third, and he said, no, I don't need that thing, man. You can get out of here with that. I think 2 weeks later, I saw he was in Las Vegas with Joe Mayo on Trackman. So
right.
maybe talking into it, I couldn't do it, but
now Tommy's the proud owner of one.
Exactly. I figured it would come to that, but
yeah,
it's just fascinating how we've seen these changes in our industry, and people are, and still with Brandl's recent article, I think everybody talked about that and how anti-Trackman he is, but that's another topic. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole because I don't talk about those political things. I just think it's
yeah. Well, it's actually funny because I could bring this up because Brandl's a friend of mine, and here's the interesting thing. Like Brandl and I will disagree on things, right? And every human being has the opportunity be themselves and have disagreements over things. But what's really cool, that at least he and I have like a mutual respect on this, I believe, is that we don't necessarily have to agree on everything. And I don't fight anything that he says. I want to understand what he's saying. And I think with social media, sometimes guys get defensive on their belief systems. And like I've had phone call conversations with Brandel about Trackman, and and he's got some valid points. I think we have to understand that if we try to bottle something that's ideal, and maybe maybe on Trackman something says it's ideal, that doesn't necessarily mean it's ideal for the playing capability. So I get some of that, and maybe chasing certain parameters isn't necessarily correct. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily, this is my belief on it, it still is not the machine's fault, right? It still becomes the user issue. And so that's part of the equation. And some of it might be like overuse of players trying to find certain things in there. So, but as of yet, I have yet to see anybody get worse using technology. So I've seen misuse of technology, but not people not doing better.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think that's really the best way to look at it. And you can use any type of technology. A smartphone is a form of technology. And I would assume nobody in today's world still has a dial-up phone in their house, or that big phone I used to carry around, when they first came out. But,
right.
It's just the way it is. And if I go to a doctor and he's telling me, hey, look, I think you're going to need some shoulder surgery, I'm going to want him to evaluate that more thoroughly and get some data from an MRI or some sort of technology before he goes cutting on me with a scalpel and cutting me open, So
yeah,
I want to know what's going on. And I think that's always been my direction with my players is I want you to know what you can know. And with that information, we can make better choices as to what direction we're going.
Correct.
So
beautifully said.
Yeah, well, thank you. But that's it. So with the golf swing, I mean, you being a Mac O'Grady guy, so with the Morad stuff and your experiences, how much of that is still a solid preference for how you would teach a player if you had someone to mold absolutely from scratch? Would you follow that model?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting thing when somebody says they're a Morad Mac O'Grady disciple or a swing guy or whatever. So first and foremost, we have to understand that there's a lot of different models, right? So there's not just one, but it's kind of an overall viewpoint of how you would put the swing together and how you would kind of liberally look at alignment. Okay, so within that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to look like Robert Rock, or you're not going to look like Grant, or you're not going to look like Alex Noren, because those three right there are all slightly different patterns here and there, but the overall guidelines are somewhat similar. And so it's a lot more free to do it that way, in my opinion, because it actually fits the scientific community's viewpoint of what the golf swing should look like. Now, let me just kind of piggyback on that. So when you look at alignments and you look at maybe the Morad system as a whole, just in and of itself, it might seem to be somewhat of a constricting viewpoint, in which it was, for sure. However, when you look at what we're doing now and you piggyback that on top of it, it becomes a lot more athletic. And you start seeing what he actually did in his swing, and you start, putting that up against, let's say, force plates and ground force reaction traces and all that kind of stuff. You can start seeing the relationships kind of fall into place. So he got a lot of that correct in his own move, right? And I'm not saying what it was said or anything like that. There's some of it was correct, some of it wasn't entirely, but from what he actually did, you can start seeing that there's similarities amongst, like, his trigger early in the swing is similar to maybe somebody like Rory McIlroy. And, when you start looking at some of the alignments, you can see like, okay, well, where he was trying to get the sweet spot to move on certain patterns really lines up to the whole argument with how torque is applied through the club. Now, he didn't measure it that way because there was no way to do it, but he kind of understood why that made sense. Now, there is also without going into like specifics too much, but there is a departure away from the hardline mechanics, because here's where things tend to fall short. So when you do create a constricting concept or model of a golf swing, you start to remove what makes a golf swing dynamic. You start losing, athleticism and stuff like that. And so we can start looking at some of the best players in the world and start seeing like, okay, some of these guys' alignments might not fit exactly to certain patterns or models, but they still move within them. And I think that's something to take note, because if I go back and look at what I was trying to do, I can see where I kind of went wrong with specific alignments and how I wasn't able to create them. I kind of artificially did it. But where now, which when you artificially do something, especially through a range of motion of a joint, you're going to lose power and speed and a bunch of other things that could aid you. So now you can kind of understand how things are formed through the right sequencing and the right pressure, and still it kind of full circles back to the original Morat. So that's kind of how I, in a general sense, that's how I kind of view things. And it's not like throwing that all under the bus. It's just one of those little, spots in history that still is very relevant, at least with me. So, which I find is kind of interesting, because obviously somebody was very brilliant to put it together. And it sometimes takes, and without getting into like, maybe O'Grady was maybe slightly difficult to get along with certain individuals, but like we kind of need that personality in the industry, and I'm sure there are other ones that will go nameless, but that create a little bit of debate and that grab attention to the industry and certain individuals in the industry doing that. Those are the ones that are stimulating change. So as much as the status quo doesn't like that, I think the status quo needs that, whether they like it or not. So yeah, it's a very interesting phenomenon, but that's where I kind of started.
Yeah, and every instructor comes to their own preferences from, again, exposure to and their influence and their successes. I mean, I'm out there on the range a lot when I'm in my normal mode of teaching, and I'm always looking at swings in a way that, why is this swing working? Why is this swing not working? What is this player trying to make the ball do differently? And, problem solving, I guess, is the best way to put it. We're always today trying to make the ball do something different.
Right.
Maybe go farther, go higher, go lower, curve more predictably, start more predictably. I mean, the things that you're trying to help the player do are all related to what's going on with the movement of the club, and therefore attached to the body, related to how the body's going to move. And understand those relationships. And so many golfers and I'm not working with the tour players that you are, I get a golfer that doesn't understand why they're topping, every third ball. And
yep. So don't worry, I have plenty of those.
We've got a different level of understanding, with that player. It's like, well, let's see what we can do to help you. Okay.
Right.
And they say, well, I know I'm picking my head up, and I'm going, no, you're not. That's not why you're topping every ball. Let's videotape you and show you didn't pick your head up. You kept your head down too long, and your trail arm begins to fold because your right shoulder stops, and there's no way for you to, hit the bottom of the ball. So, hit the turf. You got to hit the big ball before you're going to stop topping it. So,
right.
some basic things. So you're taking players and very, very carefully refining pretty good golf swings into, better golf swings. And sometimes I'm assuming it's because this player wants the ball to do something different. Do you give the player the choice? Hey, I want to fade the driver and draw my irons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you give the player the ball flight choice and then say, okay, this is how we're going to accomplish it? Or is it more about you want the ball to do this and you're going to accomplish it your way?
Well, so that's kind of a interesting thing because there was, okay. So first and foremost, the player generally, let's say a player wants to fade a ball. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask the question, why? Let's off the tee. Okay. And first off, when they say they want to fade the ball, they can't necessarily define what they want to see, but I need to know what that definition is. Okay. So the definition might be, well, I don't want to see the ball go left. Okay. So there's already some phobia or some fear mechanism built in through some experience of the ball going left. So if they're to anti-left a golf ball, how would they do that? And then it turns into kind of a discovery for me if the pattern that they're trying to do to not hit it left is necessarily sustainable. So if somebody doesn't want the ball to go left, hitting down and across it's probably not the best idea because they're once in a while going to hit the ball left, but they might feel that they're going to cut it every time. And that is a conversation I've had many a time, especially with really good players. And the problem that they come into is not a sustainable one because the spin and launch is going to become an issue, distance is going to be an issue, and they're going to start over curving it. So then I have to explain like, hey, look, you know what? Let's just try to hit the driver as straight as we can. If it falls left, falls right, it doesn't really matter. This would be the way to do it. And if they kind of can buy into that long term, they'll be okay. Because necessarily most of my guys that I work with aren't bad drivers of the ball. They're all pretty good drivers of the ball, mainly because they don't curve it very much. They hit it pretty straight. They launch it pretty well. And but the ones that tend to struggle are the ones that try to manipulate based off of some phobia. And it could go in either way, right? So that's generally where I would start, especially with a good player, is kind of understand where their mind is on why, number one, they're asking for help. And because I can go through a whole myriad of swing changes that fits my preference. And at the end of the day, it doesn't satisfy what they don't want the ball to do. And then there's a no-win on either end of this. So I think that's number one. Now, unfortunately, that's how you learn the hard way, right? So, I learned that through trial and error and mistakes and losing players and whatnot. So I think that's something you just have to go through. And because otherwise, if I just threw mechanics in there, like you just need to do this, this, and this, everything's okay. It's not the case. It's not the case at all. So I think there's a little bit of that learning how to communicate that is important.
Now, do you feel like your language is adaptable to the majority of the tour players that you're coaching, or you have to use a tremendously different verbiage with each of your players?
Yeah, so I'm getting better at that. So I'm kind of an A-type individual. I might seem somewhat passive to most people, but it's almost as if a lot of the Mac kind of rubbed off on me when it comes to golf swing stuff. So, and I'm kind of an interesting one because, I can kind of show people like, this is what you do with the swing. So it's like, well, I can actually do this. So it shouldn't be much of an issue. Now I have to obviously step back a little bit and go, okay, well, that doesn't really matter. I have to kind of dumb this down to where it's palatable and it's simple, because at the end of the day, a player is going to look at a shot they need to hit, and they're either going to feel like I can hit this shot or they can't. Mm-hmm. And the best thing in the world for that player is to feel that they can hit it. And if they have to think about their golf swing, then I didn't do a very good job. So now that might when they look at the pitcher and they look at what they're trying to hit, this should stimulate a feel that makes them feel like they can hit it. And they obviously will go through some myriad of routines or whatever that should enforce that. So that's one of the real interesting points where I look at guys out there that are very good teachers. They're very good at that. And unfortunately, and to be critical of myself, that's something I had to kind of learn how to do and continuously have to learn how to do. Because it's easy for me to break down a golf swing. That's not hard at all. And that there's, several different patterns I teach, but for a player to stand up on a tee and go, I have no qualms about hitting a ball down the fairway. That's the goal.
Yeah. Just so
that's a learned skill.
They have to perform their skill when it's time to perform versus being technical minded and trying to figure out the mechanics too late.
Right. Yeah. Patrick Harrington and I had a conversation at Honda this year. So I was on the range and Victor Hovland's there and we're hitting balls and Patrick walks up and he's a super nice guy and obviously a genius golfer in his own right. And it was interesting because we were talking about ball speed. And so Harrington, and hopefully he doesn't mind saying this, but if he hears this, but whatever. So he goes, I was able to get, 190 mile per hour ball speed in practice, but when I play, I can't do that. He goes back to normal. And it was interesting because, he was probably doing some mechanical things to create ball speed, but when the bell rings, he didn't do that. And he kind of acclimated back to his normal. And so to me, it's been kind of something that's been on my mind for a couple months now, because, here's a guy who's won major championships. He's one of the nicest guy in the world, but one of the best golfers that's walked the planet. And, a guy comes up to me and says that, you kind of scratch your head and go, okay, well, how do we change that? Mm-hmm. So, because I can do that with players too on the range. I get guys that are able to swing pretty fast. And, we can get some, massive distance on the driving range, but to get somebody like that to go faster and then go, okay, I'm going to do it on the golf course. So I think it relates to a lot of things. Could be the same in short game, could be the same in just iron play. Certain particular things have to resonate. Could be even an age thing. Maybe when you're a kid, you're just able to do that. But as we get older, we can't.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on a player not being able to take their ball speed maximums into a performance environment? What do you feel like that the reason that is? Is he more tense? Is he trying to control the golf club more? Is he not thinking about generating speed in that moment in time? And what is it?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think it's so individual for everybody. So, when a player of that caliber has kind of a golf DNA, they set up the golf course inherently, like they have a blueprint how they're going to play it. And then that blueprint's developed out of understanding how to play it and then also knowing where to miss it. And that's their comfort zone. So if you go out there and you're going to disrupt that comfort zone, it's pretty tough for your brain to creatively go there. And most of these guys are very creative when they set up over the ball. So analytically, they might understand it, but they innately won't do it. So now, sure, there's a few that may be able to do that, but it's something where I need to get more of like a case study of people and say, hey, do you have similar issues in this area? But, I think for the average player, maybe this topic doesn't matter that much, but it does relate because when you have a lot of, guys that go out on a Saturday and play with a group, they pretty much shoot the same score every time. And so when we look at that, we're like, okay, well, why is this? Are they taking lessons? Does that solve it? That's part of it, but also is their practice routine illustrated properly? Do Do they have something like a quarterly goal they're trying to get better at? Maybe it's, make 2 more putts around. Maybe it's hit one more green around or whatever, something that can kind of whittle away and develop them as a golfer. And so the more we talk like this, the more it pulls us away from necessarily what we're doing in our golf swing. But maybe that might be a component of it. But it's more or less leading the player into a concept of making things more developmental, and if a player wants to get better, this is definitely a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, with every player, that their mindset of better could be just to hit a few more solid shots in the round. It could
Correct.
It could be, hey, my score is going to be what it is. I'd just like to hit it more solid a few times and enjoy the feel of the center of the club face, and then you got guys that are trying to really, really get their score down, and understanding their game from a scoring standpoint would be something totally different than just golf swing improvements, for sure. Yeah, I've had a lot of my clients, the recreational golfer has never heard of practice off of a driving range. They think driving range practice takes place. And I said, well, that's a form of practice, and it's getting them aware that the flat surface that they're hitting those 37 irons in a row, that never takes place on a golf course. When's the last time you hit 37 irons in a row on a flat lie around the golf? Never. So they're like, wow, that's true. I never thought about that. So there you go.
Yeah. There was a situation 3 or 4 years ago at Pebble Beach in the Champions Tour event, and Faxon was there, good buddy of mine, and another friend of mine, and they're playing the Pro-Am together. And we're over by the chipping green at the Pebble Beach Academy, and the player wanted help in his pitching, and so Brad's there, and I'm like, well, okay, well, this guy's won 8 more tournaments, PGA tournaments than I did, so probably a good idea to ask him these questions. And it was interesting because it wasn't necessarily like the technique or, the how-to, the ball position, like all those things are valid. I get that. But it was more or less good to see somebody with a high ability kind of bring up, like, okay, where are your struggles? Okay, first off. And the player kind of related that struggle and kind of developed a story or a narrative around that struggle that kind of walked him off the edge a little bit. So he was like, okay, well, that's not really a struggle because that's normal, because here's a guy who played at a high level, and now this is a normal scenario. This isn't something that's abnormal. Mm-hmm. And then this is how I dealt with this situation. Okay, so now he developed a plan to pull him out of the situation. And because I was successful doing it this way, I just did it more often like this when I practice. And so then it got into some mechanic stuff. And then the guy just kind of freely kind of understood it. He stopped yipping, pitch shots and made better contact, and then developed some confidence around that. And that, so majority of the lesson was kind of developing that character to develop the confidence in the other player. And that's kind of something that we have to learn. And I think, creating that relatability factor, because if I was to go back, and I kind of said this earlier to earlier things, I'd just say, well, no, this is the way you have to do things. And that doesn't inspire necessarily comfort. It might create understanding, but not comfort. So, that's a very interesting thing in the coaching industry.
Oh yeah, it's a bedside manner of doctor. You're going to talk to him, and there's a feeling you get when he begins explaining your situation, and you're going to take the medicine of the doctor that delivers you the best message, I'm sure. For sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, I think, for all coaches to get a little better at that. But So with your game, do you play at all? I mean, when you get the opportunity as a coach?
Not so much anymore. I mean, I still hit balls and pitch and chip and putt around a little bit. Right now, I'm waiting on my net. It's raining outside in California, which is crazy, but I'm waiting on my net to get delivered so I can hit balls right and left-handed. So
Okay.
I've been swinging left-handed and swinging right-handed. It looks fine. So just
Mm-hmm.
need to hit that little white ball.
Yeah. Yeah. So a net's on the way. That's awesome. You'll be
It
able
is, yeah.
to do that. And as far as your wife and your family, is she into the game? You got a daughter, I think, or more than?
Yep. So they're observers. So my daughter's got a pretty good golf swing. She's a good athlete. She likes to hit balls. I'm not one to kind of push,
Sure.
family into playing. But they've gone out a couple times with me. But I think it's interesting because when she goes out there and just hits, it's pretty fun to watch because she just naturally has observed, different students of mine over the years, and the swing looks pretty good. So, and she's a good athlete.
Product of the environment. You've had
Correct.
Up running, and she's like, "Well, I can do that, Dad. That's not."
Yeah.
Do you have a Top Golf in your area that you can take her to?
Not yet. So they're building one in Manhattan Beach, Sepulveda area. So I don't know exactly when that will break ground, but I know it's in the works. So the next closest one I think is Vegas. I'm pretty sure, but they'll have one here in LA. So it'll be pretty busy when it does open.
Yeah, I've got a 22-year-old son who played college golf, and he's been to the one in Vegas a few times because his sister lives out there from visits that he's gone on. So it's pretty interesting. I've never been to a Top Golf, but I hear everybody say, it's a great time and a great way to get the non-golfers excited.
Yeah, it's also a great way to spend $200 real fast.
Yeah, I guarantee if you're going to eat and drink a little bit, you will.
Yeah, for sure.
So with, talking about the golf swing a little bit, I'm not going to let you get away without giving us a little insight. So golfers are a lot of the time right now aren't getting to the course. They're working on their game at home. You're going to share some gold with us and tell us what we need to understand and do while we're not getting to play.
Yeah, I just kind of generally look at it as an opportunity to take inventory on where we're at. So I think people are really chomping the bit to get out and play. That doesn't mean that you can't stimulate much change. You can, but it's a good time to kind of hook up with, a golf instructor that you respect or enjoy, talking to, and you've developed a relationship with, and then find out if he or she has a way to kind of help you with the golf game. So it may be a good time to sit down and say, okay, this is what I've been shooting. This is how many times I putt. This is how many times I hit greens. Or you don't have to make it too specific. If you have access to that, fantastic. But generally speaking, just kind of look at it as a time to create some goals. And if that's, viable for you. But I think like right now, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of avenues that people can take. So that'd be number one. If you have a backyard and you have the ability to get a net and maybe a mat, some balls, go for it. Definitely work on maybe a putting mat. But yeah, I don't necessarily see as this is a time to slow down. I know, the camaraderie portion of being out there with your friends to play is a big part of this, but why not come back and play with your buddies as a better golfer? So I think that's the first thing to do. Yeah. But yeah, I would definitely work on the golf swing, because it's just an awesome time to do it.
Well, and I've found for myself over the years as I've developed my game, different times throughout the winter when I wasn't as active as a player, I would find myself in the garage with an old dresser mirror and just really try to understand what positional aspects of the swing and what they felt like and why I was feeling what I was feeling and where the club was and just taking stock in my own swing. It was an opportunity to do that and work on it and improve things just by using a mirror. If you know what you're looking for, certainly if you know what you're trying to accomplish. We've changed. Our industry's changed. Our world has changed. Things continue to evolve. You as an instructor, you're leading a great path for all of us other instructors to follow, and I'm really respectful of what you do. fascinated by it. So it's maybe the next step for me is to come out and watch you teach and learn from you, and spend a little time on your lesson tee. Hopefully we can get that opportunity when things open back up and we can come face to face with our brethren again.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Always welcome. No, I think we'll everybody will be okay. Everybody should come back with the mindset of becoming better. So, which I think is going to happen.
Well, I agree. And Dana, all the best to you and your family as you continue to do what you do, and hopefully things break loose and the PGA Tour gets back to play, and we can watch some great golf. And I'm excited about those opportunities to get better while we are quarantined and staying by home, and it's the way it'll be for a little while.
Absolutely.
So, all my listeners, I want you to kind of keep in mind, you can reach out to Dana. He's on all the social media sites. I know you're a big Instagrammer and Facebook and probably some Twitter. So everybody can reach Dana Dahlquist. If you want to reach me, you know how to do that. It's Allen at allenburtongolf.com. Dana, give us an email or how you'd like people to get in touch with you specifically.
I would say just you can do Instagram or danadahlquistgolf.com. So those are the two best ways.
Fantastic. Dana, can't thank you enough for spending a little time with me today, buddy. Safe and
anytime.
And all the best to you, and we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
You bet. Thank you so much.
All right, listeners, that's Dana Dahlquist from Long Beach, California, a swing guru, phenomenal guy, as you can tell, but just listening to him chat about the game, his passion is unrivaled, and I'm so blessed to have had the opportunity to chat with him. Reach out if you have golf swing questions. We're here to help. That's what we do every day, golfers. So this has been the Forecast. I hope you have a great evening, a great day, and do the best you can while you have these opportunities, golfers, to get better. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.